Malachy STEENSON, he's from central Dublin originally, is a man with a great mind, great stories, and he's going to talk about as a solicitor, the legal problems involved with trying to get rid of our natural right to free speech. So everybody, build applause for Malachy STEENSON. Go Malachy.
Go Malachy!
Firstly, I want to thank the Irish Freedom Party for asking me here today to speak as an independent speaker along with other people. About what is one of the biggest threats to democracy in this country, the denial of free speech. And I also want to welcome here today the state's intelligence services who are here taking our photographs. So that is an indication that they are afraid of free speech, that they are afraid of the small group that is assembled here. We are now making waves. To listen to the establishment and the woke politicians, you would think there was no safeguards for people. We already have legislation banning what they call hate speech. But the fundamental difference in the proposal by Helen McEntee is that that won't have to be hate speech. Somebody will just have to say that they were offended by it. Not even the person who it may have been directed at, but any of yous could say that something I say or somebody else on this platform says is offensive to somebody else, and that would be enough for an arrest and charge. Censorship is nothing new in this country. From the establishment of this state, the political powers have sought to stifle public debate and discussion. In the 20s and 30s and indeed the 40s, they executed people who stood up against them, both Fianna Fáil and the Blue Shirt regime. In the 1970s, they brought in Section 31 of the Broadcasting Act, which banned many of the people who were the strongest opponent or supporters of the new legislation from the airwaves. And this is not simply a matter of just stopping political activists from speaking. If you go back to the late 1970s and the Gatto strike, and Larry O'Toole, who's now a provisional Sinn Féin councillor, was the spokesperson and the trade union representative for those workers. RTE refused to interview him because he was a member of Provisional Sinn Féin. That is what you're talking about. And I listened the other day to an interview with Matt Cooper and Miriam O'Callaghan, where she said that there was no groupthink in RTE. She said that Prime Time was a balanced programme, and that nobody listening to the programmes would ever know what her opinion was on that programme. I don't know about you, but I've listened to Prime Time till I got fed up watching it. And that was never the impression I got. So obviously there's a different programme broadcast to Mars or somewhere that Miriam O'Callaghan is on. We know today that Enoch Burke, and people may agree with him or disagree with him, that's not the issue, is lying in a cell in Mountjoy prison. When we're told that there are no prison places for criminals. And people will say, who argue that there is free speech, will say that he's not in jail because of his view of what happened in the school in relation to some child who wants to be called something else. There would be no injunction if he had not stood up for his rights. I don't have to agree with him, but I will defend his right to have an opinion and to articulate it, and to debate against them if need be. Likewise, I would expect that he and others would respect my opinion and allow a debate, not say, well, we don't agree with you, so you're not to have an opinion. And that is the biggest problem that we have in this country. It's not confined to here. In Britain, some of you may know that there's a Protestant minister called Bernard Randall, who was a school chaplain, a Church of England minister. He took part in a debate in Trent College in Derbyshire. about LGBT rights, and he simply reiterated the Church of England's position. For doing that, he was sacked from his job as a school chaplain, and the Church of England reported him to the anti-terrorism police, saying that he was a threat to children. For saying to children, you can make up your own mind on this, you don't have to agree. Likewise, many of you may have noticed or heard that there's an RTE are running this Eurovision show in October. And we won the Eurovision 7 times with 6 singers. The first time we won it was with Donna, who comes from Herman's hometown. Donna was not invited to that show. RTE said they couldn't contact her. I'm sure she has a Facebook page or she's on social media. The reason she wasn't invited, and it's very clear, is because she's not woke. She doesn't agree with their agenda. And this is a woman who stood for the highest office in this land, who stood in the election and done quite well to be president. A woman who is anti-abortion and who has Christian beliefs. Again, I don't have to agree with her, but I would defend her right to have those views and to articulate them. And surely the first person, as a young girl, in the middle of the start of the Troubles in the 6 counties in 1969 and 70, a young woman who went and won the Eurovision for us, the first time we ever won it. Surely she should be on that programme. Now, if she was asked, I would suggest that she should decline. It's not just your views on trans stuff or LGBT stuff, it's your views against anything that the state says is the current belief. Anybody who stood out against COVID and even just questioned it over the last number of years was described as a conspiracy theorist. The conspiracies don't look too far out now, do they? No. We're told that all of these groups represent us. You have the Citizens' Assembly sitting up there today to tell us what way to vote in the next referendum. This country is now run not by the people inside, but by the over 30,000 NGOs and quangos and charities that are funded to the tune of almost €6 billion per year. They set the agenda. And when you have a group like the National Women's Council, which gets a fortune from the taxpayer, who comes out and condemns the IRFU for making a decision based on health and safety, and on those grounds alone it should have been supported, that biological men cannot play rugby against biological women. That would seem to me to be common sense. And how are we to say to our young women today, go out and train every day of the week to be the best swimmer in the world? You'll get to the Olympics, but you won't win because some guy who can't achieve success against men will beat you. What is that to say to women? What has the National Women's Council, who claim to represent women, got to say about that? Where are the feminists who talk about women's rights on all of these issues? It seems to me that women who are just what they now call cis women are excluded from society. What has happened over the past number of years is this society has created sheep who have suspended all of their critical thinking. If you told them 1 and 1 is 7, they would believe you. And somebody like Michael or somebody else that comes along and says, well, actually 1 and 1 is 2. Oh no, that's a conspiracy. It can't be. The government said it's 7. We're told that landlords are now the new enemy. That the man who bought a second home during the Celtic Tiger for his pension because the state does not provide adequate pensions except for its own employees, they're told that they're the enemy because they're coming to an age now that they need to sell it to fund their pension. They're paying over 50% tax on those rental properties. They're paying capital gains and they're paying a mortgage. But they're the enemy because the state has fundamentally failed for the past 30 years to supply housing and build housing for social tenants, which was always the responsibility of the state. Although, if we were now to suggest that the state build somewhere like Ballymun, Finglas, Cabra, Crumlin, any of those areas, it would probably cost billions, when we're even capable of building a children's hospital for less than 3 billion. We can't even do a report into sites there without that costing more than we lost on the original, I won't say well, I'll say scandal because that's what the report says. So the state has abdicated its responsibility. But what we are doing, or what they are doing with this new legislation, is they're creating a two-tier criminal justice system. And they're at this, not just with the hate crimes, but with all of this Me Too and all of these, the Rape Crisis Centre and all of these groups who say that if a woman makes an allegation of rape against a man, that she should automatically believe, and that we should almost dispense with a criminal trial. So that says to me that any man who is either correctly or incorrectly accused won't get a fair trial. They don't want the woman to have to give evidence. That is a total different set of criminal justice. And we cannot allow there to be two types of society. We cannot allow a society where there is one, we already know that those people in there abide by a different set of laws. I would say a moral compass, but they don't seem to have a moral compass at all. They want to create this divide. And the argument that they pursue about landlords being the problem is because they have failed in their responsibilities to the people of this country. And what we need to do is to ensure that they're not allowed to get away with those arguments. And in time, if they bring in this legislation, anything you say which is counter government policy or counter woke policy, as it now stands, will be a crime. We see yesterday tragic events in Westmeath where 2 children died. Now we can speculate as to what happened. But last weekend there were 3 children killed in the most vicious manner. There has been no discussion or debate about that across mainstream media since that happened, and they'll argue that, well, somebody has been charged and we can't influence the jury. They said the same when the teacher was killed down the country once somebody was charged. Those trials in this country will take 2 to 3 years to come on for hearing. People will have forgot what actually happened, and there's something fundamentally wrong in this society when regularly we're hearing of deaths of children being murdered, in general by their parents or some other close relative. That we have to address that, and we can't be kicking it down the road till a trial. We can't be saying that, oh, well, she has mental health issues, or if the father done it, well, he should be locked up and strung up. But if the mother somehow done it, then that's somewhat okay. We need to have that debate, and we need to discuss these things. And if you go back to one of the comments that Mother Teresa made, she said that if a mother is prepared to kill her child in the womb, then there is no load that society will not stoop to. And now, as I say, regularly we're hearing of the murder of children in all different circumstances, in some horrific cases. Years ago we looked at some of the science fiction films which were set on some far-off planets where we saw people going around in cars that were controlled by a satellite. People who were walking into work and doing menial tasks with no critical thinking, no thinking of what they were doing, no money in their pocket, using a card. All of these things are not so sci-fi now. They are all coming to a place near you soon. And unless people stand up and object, then these things will slip in slowly but surely. Just to come back to the Enoch Burke case, when the Shell to Sea protests were on, 6 of those protesters spent over 3 months in prison for contempt, without being convicted of anything, for a civil contempt. And Enoch Burke has said he'll stay there for 100 years if necessary. He's a legend. And he's a legend. The fact is if they're holding him in prison, at least he should be in an open prison. At least he should be in a prison where he's not incarcerated with the biggest drug dealers in this country. We have no difficulty in finding a place and a cell for Enoch Burke, but yet drug dealer after drug dealer in this country have destroyed the next generation, and have destroyed that generation with the compliance and the acceptance of the people inside, many who are coked out of it at weekends themselves. And the problem is that if we don't stand up as a society and say that these things have to change, then nothing will change. And I'll finally end with the words of Terence McSweeney, who died on hunger strike over 100 years ago. If only a few faithful, I can't actually remember the quote, the exact quote, but it says that we are the faithful few, and if there are only a faithful few who stand and hold our principles and our beliefs, then we will succeed. But we must hold the flame. We must stand up. We must hold on to our principles, and we must articulate them, regardless of what Helen McEntee says or anybody else. And we all must risk whatever punishment the state will bring on us. And, you know, they're gathering their intelligence here today because they see you as a threat. They see the arguments that are being put forward, and I'm not concerned about the individuals. It's the arguments you're putting forward. It's the arguments that they know are correct. Everybody in this country knows that Enoch Burke is correct. They know he's right, but they're afraid to stand up and say it because RTE and the mainstream media will demonise them. They risk losing their jobs. And Enoch Burke knows when he made that stand that he will never work in this country as a teacher again. And that is a sad reflection on a country that claims to be a democracy. Where are the teachers' unions who, if this argument was the other way around, there will be protests here with thousands of people demanding his release? But because he doesn't fit in to their narrow, woke, bigoted agenda, he's thrown to the wolves. Thank you very much.